Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and try to unravel the tragic, honestly baffling mystery of Air India Flight 171. We're looking at a devastating event that happened on June 12, 2025, in Ahmedabad, India. It's a case that has absolutely stumped aviation experts worldwide. So today, we're going to break down exactly what we know, purely based on the official investigation reports and the clues left behind in the wreckage.
We've got to start with a terrifyingly small number: 32. 32 seconds. That is the exact amount of time this brand new, state-of-the-art Boeing 787 Dreamliner actually stayed in the air before a disaster struck. I mean, think about that for a second. Just 32 seconds of flight. And this wasn't some aging, worn-out aircraft, right? It had barely 41,000 hours on the airframe, and its General Electric engines were practically brand new, installed less than 3 months prior. So you're probably wondering, what could possibly bring down a modern marvel of engineering in less than a minute?
Well, the flight data reveals this incredibly rapid, high-tension timeline. At 0 seconds, the takeoff roll begins down runway 23. Totally normal. 62 seconds later, the aircraft lifts off into clear skies. Again, perfectly normal. But then just 3 seconds after liftoff, at the 65-second mark, the data shows both fuel control switches transitioning from run straight to cutoff. Instantly, both engines shut down. 5 seconds after that, the ram air turbine, or the RAT, automatically deploys to provide emergency power. Finally, at 88 seconds in, there's a desperate mayday call reporting a complete loss of thrust. The plane rapidly loses altitude, its tail clips a campus canteen, and it crashes just 1.7 kilometers from the runway.
Now, before we dig too deep into the mechanics of exactly why this happened, we really have to ground this technical mystery in its immense human cost. The toll was catastrophic: 260 total fatalities. That includes 229 passengers and all 12 crew members on board this flight, which was originally bound for London Gatwick. And tragically, it also includes 19 people on the ground at the BJ Medical College campus, where the aircraft came down. It destroyed 5 buildings and sparked fires that reached a staggering 1,500 degrees Celsius.
The sheer horror of this is really highlighted by the absolute miracle of the single survivor, Vishwesh Kumar Ramesh, a 40-year-old passenger who happened to be seated in 11A, right next to an emergency exit. He recalled how he literally escaped through an opening that was created when the door just broke open upon impact. That entire section of the aircraft detached and somehow came to rest on the ground floor of a hostel. His harrowing escape, walking away with just minor burns and cuts, it really emphasizes the intense human stakes here and just how incredibly rare survival is in a crash of this magnitude. So transitioning into detective mode, investigators from India's AAIB, working alongside the British AAIB and the US NTSB, immediately hit the ground to piece together the clues. They pulled airport CCTV, which actually captured the aircraft wobbling and sinking out of view. Crucially, they managed to recover the front enhanced airborne flight recorder, basically the black box, from a mess hall roof. They also confirmed the automatic deployment of that RAT we mentioned earlier, which proves the aircraft experienced a massive, total loss of power mid-air. All these clues pointed to one undeniable fact: the engines completely shut down.
To understand what went wrong, we really need to define the central puzzle piece of this whole investigation: the fuel control switch. On the Boeing 787, you've got these 2 switches located directly beneath the throttle levers. Their job is simple, but obviously absolutely critical. Moving a switch from run to cutoff instantly halts fuel flow to that engine. Now, under normal circumstances, these are only used on the ground, for starting up or shutting down the engines. Doing this in mid-flight, that is strictly an emergency procedure. Like, you'd only do it if there was a severe engine fire that absolutely required an immediate shutdown.
And here's what's truly crucial to understand: the actual physical design of the switch itself. Boeing designed a very specific spring-loaded locking mechanism to stop accidental activations mid-flight. To shut off the fuel, a pilot can't just accidentally bump the switch with their hand. It doesn't work like that. The switch must first be deliberately pulled out, actually overcoming a physical spring, before it can be moved up or down. On top of that, there are physical brackets guarding the switches from unintentional contact. Basically, it takes deliberate physical effort to bypass these safety measures.
But then, the mystery deepens immensely with a genuinely chilling exchange captured on the cockpit voice recorder. In those desperate, chaotic moments right after the engine shut down, one pilot asks, "Why did you perform the cutoff?" And the other pilot immediately responds, "I didn't." Both of these highly experienced pilots, Captain Sumit Sabharwal and First Officer Clive Kunder, express total, utter confusion over the engine shutdowns. The recording cuts out at just 32 seconds. We know they were desperately trying to get one engine to relight, but its core speed just kept falling. They simply couldn't recover thrust in time.
So this lack of clarity from the voice recorder has led to a really tense division within the investigative community. Because look, the physical flight data shows the switches moving, but the audio shows the pilots flat out denying they moved them. It's a massive contradiction, and it split the focus into two conflicting theories. On one side, we have the mechanical failure theory. On the other, the deliberate action theory. Let's impartially walk through both of these, purely looking at the evidence presented in the official source materials.
Let's start with the mechanical failure theory, which is heavily supported by the Indian pilots' unions. A critical piece of context here is a 2018 FAA warning about Boeing 737s. It noted that similar fuel switches had sometimes been installed with their locking mechanisms disengaged. Plus, post-crash analysis showed the throttle levers were kept exactly where they should be, right at takeoff thrust. The flight data also proved both pilots immediately and frantically tried to restart the engines as they were falling. Actually, the Supreme Court of India later noted in their preliminary observations that there was, quote, no insinuation against the pilot in the initial AIIB report.
Conversely, let's look at the deliberate action theory. According to reports from the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, some U.S. government and industry officials, including a former senior NTSB official, strongly suspect intentional human intervention. Why? Well, they point to the incredibly precise 1-second interval between the two switches being flipped from run to cutoff. Just one exact second. They also heavily emphasize that intense physical pulling motion we talked about earlier, the one required to bypass those spring-loaded locks. Their argument is essentially that such precise, sequenced movements on highly guarded switches are just astronomically unlikely to be caused by a random mechanical glitch.
But wait, it gets more complicated. The mechanical failure theory hit a major roadblock during the aftermath of the fleet groundings. After the crash, Air India conducted super rigorous follow-up inspections on its entire Boeing 787 wide-body fleet, and they found absolutely zero issues with the fuel switch locking mechanisms. The US FAA reviewed all the data and explicitly stated they did not consider this an unsafe condition in the design. They didn't even issue an airworthiness directive for the 787 model. Adding to all of this, Air India training pilots spent hours in flight simulators and could not successfully recreate any sort of mechanical or electrical failure that would cause this specific dull engine flameout. It just wouldn't happen.
So, where does that actually leave us? Well, exactly 1 year later, on June 12, 2026, India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau released an interim statement. It confirmed that, yes, while significant progress has been made in analyzing the mountain of evidence, the investigation is still entirely ongoing. There is no timeline provided for a final report, none at all. So the global aviation community, and far more importantly, the grieving families of the 260 victims, are just left waiting in limbo for a definitive answer.
Which really brings us back to the ultimate question of this explainer. Was the downing of Air India Flight 1771 the result of a tragic, completely unprecedented mechanical flaw, one that somehow managed to magically bypass multiple physical safety locks? Or was it a deliberate, almost unthinkable human act, committed in the span of just 32 seconds? As we wait for the final official report, this mystery really leaves us pondering the incredibly fragile margins of aviation safety. It's a stark reminder that even in our most technologically advanced, meticulously engineered machines, the definitive truth can sometimes remain frustratingly out of reach. Stay curious, keep analyzing the data, and thank you so much for exploring this with me today.